So we're going to start recording the podcast, and we have our friend Joe, who's going to help us with the podcast, and he's going to be editing the videos together and posting it and doing all that stuff for us. And in return, Joe doesn't want us to pay up. Joe doesn't want us to pay him.
This is David's favorite kind of person.
Yeah, this is Joe doesn't want us to pay him. He wants us to give him 25 seconds on the podcast every episode.
25?
25 seconds. And I know this isn't being recorded on video, but I'm going to give Joe a little bit of 25 seconds right now. I'm going to hand it over to Joe. This is Joe's spot.
First of all,
in return,
this is a bad idea.
Why?
Because there's no good thing that's he's not going to be able to say anything good in 25 seconds. It's a lose-lose.
Okay, on your marks, get set, go.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Joe coming in live with Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast. First off, what's the deal with vacation days? Holiday pay, time and a half. I have a wedding coming up in June, just as a heads up, so I need that Wednesday off. We're going to be talking segments, Dish and Dirt with David and Just Joshin' with Jason. I do podcast ads as well, so ZipRecruiter, if you want to hit me up, I do spots for half the price that they're charging. You guys can find me on MySpace at allhitshow.com.
That was 25 seconds. Okay.
Oh, man, that was a hot podcast.
Joe told me, I don't know if he was kidding, but Joe told me that he was going to start selling ads in his 25-second segment, which I find really fucked up. If he turns around, if all of a sudden I give him the thing and he starts going, Skittles, the smartest candy in the world, I'm going to stab him right in the eye.
Sounds like he got ZipRecruiter, too.
Yeah, ZipRecruiter got double the ads because Joe's reading one. Okay, so that was Joe's payment. So now we continue with the podcast as normal. Joe Volpus is here, guys. We have this new segment where we give the mic to him, and he gets 25 seconds to talk in exchange for editing this podcast and putting it up to post. And your time starts now.
Wait, hang on. My notes aren't ready yet.
I don't care.
Restart the timer?
I don't care.
I don't know where it is.
17 seconds.
No, come on. Guys, welcome back to Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast. What's up, Weenies? Reporting record high numbers from last week. We had 500,000 listens. Pretty insane. Thank you to David for allowing me to expose myself to his audience. Guys, how much time is left?
4 seconds.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Guys, make sure to, I'm working on getting more airtime, but the man is trying to keep us down, the government. Ah!
Okay, that's all the time we have. We actually gave you a little bit of too much time on that one. We're going to have to take it away from next week's episode.
No!
Next week's episode, you're going to have 20 seconds.
Good job, Joe.
Can I at least tell them about the ice cream social?
No, 100% not. You have to keep your mouth shut from now on. Guys, right now we have Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast. It's a part of our podcast. It's where Joe comes in. I give him 25 seconds.
Don't plug for yourself.
Joe, I'm about to give you 25 seconds. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay, here we go. Joe gets 25 seconds on the clock now.
Welcome back to Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast. I just want to bring something up. I called out last week. Nobody did my read. What was that about?
You called out what?
I called out of the podcast. I was sick.
Oh, he was sick out of the podcast last week and no one read it.
I got so many tweets saying, "Where's Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast? It's the best thing on the Views podcast joint."
How many tweets did you get?
Like 6.
That well.
It's about as many as I get.
And we're done. That was 25 seconds. Thank you, Joe. You would think that Joe would use his time better.
Yeah, what was that?
He literally just complained.
Also, he made no sense with the way he phrased it. I got called out last week.
Yeah.
Which wasn't what he was trying to say.
That
What
was-
he was trying to say was,
Joe,
people missed me.
You know what's crazy is Joe has all week to prepare for this podcast
Yeah.
for a 25-second segment.
Not much.
And he fucking just fucks it up.
Yeah.
And this week, he had 2 weeks to prepare because he called out or whatever last week. So he had so much time to prepare.
Yeah.
And it sucked. I mean, but I think that's his plan. I think his psyche behind it,
Yeah.
or his what he's trying to do is he's trying to make it a shitty podcast. So we talk about it right after. Because realistically, we just gave an extra 4 minutes of airtime just by talking about how shitty the podcast is. I don't know. Whatever he's doing is working.
I don't give him that much credit.
Okay, we're done.
I think he's a straight fuck up.
I'm done talking about Joe. Guys, now we have a segment that we like to call Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast. It's a 25-second segment that we gave to our friend. He only gets 25 seconds to do it. It's really quick. I'm putting the timer on now. His name is Joe, and this is his Teeny Weeny podcast. Go.
Welcome back to Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast, the #1 rated mini podcast within a podcast. And today we have our very first guest, David Dobrik's assistant, Natalie. Natalie, how are you?
Hi, Joe. I'm doing so great today.
That is all the time we have for today on Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast. Thanks for stopping by, Natalie. Anything else to say?
No problem. Thanks.
All right.
You have 7 seconds.
Wow, we can plug my Twitter today. Guys, follow me on Twitter at it's Joe.
That's all the time we have. Joe, I still to this day I am surprised at how little you say during 25 seconds. I feel like we get more done in 25 seconds and we don't look forward to this all week. We have 40 minutes to kill and I still feel like we talk about more in 25 seconds. You really make the 25 seconds feel like an hour. And I think maybe that's what's so amazing about you is
Yeah, when you called out 7 seconds, I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
7 seconds left?
Yeah, I was like, holy shit, get me fucking over this. Yeah, that's something else. Well, thank you for joining us, Joe.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Right after Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast, our friend Buddy Joe has a podcast. We give him 25 seconds of space on our podcast, and it starts in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here you go, Joe.
Thanks for coming down to Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast featuring views. We have a special guest today, and we have our first ad read. Guys,
Are you fucking serious?
come on down to John's Lawn Mowing Service. Don't be an ass, cut your grass. And our first guest is Jason...
Smash.
Jason Nas.
No, you're reading it wrong.
I'm reading the call sheet. It says Jason
And there
Nas.
was a misspelling on it.
That's all the time we have for Joe's podcast.
I didn't even get to go on the podcast. What's this? That's bullshit.
You know, it's so short, but I regret it so much. That is an incredibly horrible podcast.
Can I get booked again
No.
on the podcast?
You also
I
can't-
had like no time. You,
You
like,
also
ate up the whole show.
Stop staring at Joe. I'm having security kick him out now. That's it, guys. We don't need him. Well, that was a Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast. That's probably the best segment ever.
I didn't even get to talk.
Joe yesterday told me that he wants to try to win a Streamy next year for best podcast, and he wants to compete against us, which I think is a little fucked.
I told him he should just put it out, just the 25 seconds on iTunes.
He should just start selling that and make it $1. No, I didn't see. Yeah, Joe made an actual call sheet for like a call sheet that you would have on a set for Jason to come and show up for his Teeny Weeny podcast.
Yeah, and my name was misspelled.
Oh shit. That's a
Jason
mess.
Nas.
This next segment is called Joe's Teeny Weeny Podcast. Joe is a guy who gets 25 seconds on every podcast, and he's a mini podcast, and the podcast starts now. He just brought out fucking Blue Moons that aren't even opened. Okay, here we go. And Blue Moon's beer. He gave Jason a beer.
Joe.
And go.
Welcome back to Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast.
I don't have an opener. Why
I
are you
didn't tell
telling
you
me to open it?
Not yet. Hang on. Guys, I'm going to try a little ASMR. We have a special guest, Jason Nas. So first off, this is the soothing part of the podcast. I hope you really like this part. This is great. Okay, thank you. Now we have our guest, Jason Nas. Jason, how's it going? I see there's a dress code. We're doing all white today.
They can't see that, Joe.
Did you get the call time?
Okay, and that's it. Joe, I'm sorry. I say this every podcast. I am mind blown at the fact that you stay here 3 hours waiting for us to record this podcast, and that is the performance you give for the 25 seconds. Jason, isn't that...
Write a joke. Maybe write one joke.
Joe, do something.
I have a joke. Can I say it?
Fuck off.
Please, give me 3 seconds. I promise you'll...
What did you think the 25 seconds was going to do?
Joe.
You spent 10 of the seconds grabbing the blue moon.
Someone in Wisconsin's going to laugh at my joke. I promise.
Okay,
Can I say it?
make the fucking joke.
Thank you. So I was in the men's locker room today and I left and I was craving hot dogs. What's up with that?
Give me this shit. Get out of my house. Go walk out the door and take your blue moons with. And honestly, don't bring them next time. There's one more blue moon here. Take this one too. Wow. Okay. Well, that was Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast.
By the way, Joe records his Teeny Weeny podcast, and we don't even record. He just videotaped that.
Yeah, he videotapes his podcast. I don't know where it goes, but he is videotaping it. He's one step ahead of us. Actually, Jack, our manager, called him the other day about the Teeny Weeny podcast, and I think he's gonna get you brand deals.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, he's gonna get you jobs. But yeah, other than that, that was absolutely ridiculous and a big
Joe,
waste of
how
time.
much time from the 25 seconds are you going to devote to an ad?
Guys, this next segment is Joe's Teeny Weeny podcast. We have our friend Joe.
He's helping us out with the podcast. So we're going to give him 30 seconds of airtime starting, 25 seconds of airtime starting. Yeah, it went up a little bit. Starting now.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Joe from Joe's Teeny Weeny Podcast back. I just found out last week they play an entire podcast before my podcast, which is kind of messed up. I'm working on it. Cadence, if you can reach out. Guys, make sure to follow me on Twitter at UghItsJoe, UGHITSJOE. And I just wanted to... we have a guest in the studio today, Jason Nash. Jason, how's it going?
That's all the time we have.
Oh, come on!
Damn it.
Wow.
Next week, sorry.
This one was better because he at least shouted himself out. Normally, and he did that cool sound effect at the beginning that kind of made this podcast more interesting.
I thought it was the best one yet. Still fucking garbage.
Still really bad. Joe, you have to edit the podcast today. Joe looked at me and he's like, "Yep, Joe, you're putting this up today because that was bullshit." And it's just I can't.
Why don't you hire a writer for the Teeny Weeny podcast?
Can't afford it.
Can you stop talking to him? You're giving him extra airtime.
Yeah, you're right.
What's the deal with...
How is he still in here?
Hey, guys.
But this next segment is called Joe's Teeny Weeny Podcast. Joe is actually not in town, so we have my assistant taking over. She gets 25 seconds for the podcast.
Natalie came in here. I thought it was an intervention.
Natalie's here. She's my assistant. And go.
Okay, welcome back to Joe's Teeny Weeny Podcast. Like David said, Joe's on tour in New York right now. He's performing a live podcast performance at Madison Square Garden.
He's there for Thanksgiving.
He has poured his blood, sweat, and tears into this passion project. And I quote, he says, "I'm not surprised that his podcast is doing so well." Again, that was a quote from Joe. And tickets from his Teeny Weeny Podcast live show sold out within seconds. And Joe is not surprised. Also, now I get time today.
That's all the
He
time.
only sold 25 tickets for the 25 seconds.
Okay, that was Natalie. That was my assistant. This next portion of the podcast is Joe's Teeny Weeny Podcast. It's our friend Joe. He gets 45 seconds on the
I
clock.
thought it was 25.
Oh, he gets 25?
Give me a raise.
No,
Keep
fuck you. You get
changing.
25 seconds.
Holidays.
I'm sorry. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Joe's Teeny Weeny Podcast, where the games...
Oh, God.
where everything's made up and my opinion doesn't matter. Shout out to Corey Garcia. Thanks for tweeting me and asking me for a shout out. It's Joe. Today we have a special guest. I've been emailing Jason to come on the show for the past 6 weeks now. Has it been?
Yeah.
Jason, thanks for coming out.
That's all the time we have. Joe, I hate you. I fucking hate you. I hate you.
What part of you thought that this fit with
I don't
our
know.
show views?
I don't know.
What the fuck were you thinking?
Hey, dude,
it literally doesn't fit with our show in any way. We had such a good thing going. Old guy, young guy. David makes fun of the old guy.
I know.
The young kids think that's funny. And
Yeah.
then you invited
Yeah, I
fucking
fucked up.
Captain Kangaroo in here.
I'll take this one.
I mean, now we can't get rid of him.
I don't
And
like-
what does he do?
I don't-
He doesn't edit the fucking podcast. I do. The deal was to film the god. Let me tell the listeners. The deal was to fucking film the podcast so Jason could make more money and put it on YouTube.
And
You
in
can make
return, and if we film it, Joe edits it, and that's why he has that spot.
Yeah.
But Joe hasn't been editing shit.
Joe doesn't edit. He was away last week. Jason edits. And Joe, I don't see any fucking cameras in this room. I see a big view sign and nothing.
You gotta
And
pull
know
the
what-
mic out. Calm down.
And you know what else I don't see? Money in my bank account, David.
No, listen. I'm gonna. I usually don't like to say I'm wrong about things, but I will be honest. Joe is a complete screw up, and I completely regret doing this. But I feel like we're in so deep that we can't stop it at this point.
Yeah, because people on Twitter like him.
Well, that's not true.
Can't get rid of him now.
No, that's not true.
That's not true, Jason.
Don't let him coming up to you and showing you 3 tweets persuade you that people like the segment. This is undoubtedly the worst part of our podcast. I think that's very clear.
I mean, I thought I was unfunny during this podcast, and then it just went down 10 fucking notches when Joe got the mic.
I like it because it's impressive. It shows you. It makes our podcast better. I think it's like, oh wow, that was really fucking shitty, and then it makes you appreciate the actual podcast more, and that's why I like it.
I guess.
All right, enough about Joe. He's a crazy dude.